Hello, and welcome to the review. So here are the vocabulary words that are important for the particular unit. So they're all right here. On the next slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain some of the terms, and then what's going to happen is there's going to be about 4 or 5 questions that you have to answer on the Edpuzzle so that you can review for your quiz on Thursday. So what words are important? Basically, each of the main words are going to have to deal with one of the 3 branches of government. So there's the 3 branches of government. I have them in a triangle. Pay attention to what each branch of government does with laws. So the first branch is the legislative branch, and the legislative branch is the one that creates laws. Another word for laws is legislation. So as long as you know that legislation is another word for law, and Congress makes the laws, then you know that legislative and legislation have to deal with Congress. In the game, most of the time you are doing the game, you are in Congress creating laws, right? You are adding clauses and things like that. The next branch is the executive branch, and we generally associate that with the president. So the seal for the White House is right there. The executive branch is our next branch of government. Their main role is to enforce or carry out laws. So they don't create law, they just make sure that those laws are listened to. So the president can't make laws. They can come up with ideas for laws and give those ideas to Congress. So like in the game, if you remember, you as the president came up with an idea and then it became like a light bulb. So presidents can come up with ideas, but they can't create laws. That's what the job of the legislative branch. So the executive branch carries out the law. If you remember, I said when you execute things, you carry it out. So the executioner carries out the sentence, makes sure that the sentence is enforced. The last branch is the judicial branch, or the Supreme Court. It is their job to judge. Look at the word, judicial, judge. Their main role is to judge or interpret the law. And by interpret, what that means is they have to make sure that it agrees with the Constitution. As long as the Constitution basically says that the law can do what it wants, then the law is perfectly fine and it can stay. If not, they have to get rid of it. So now what I'm going to ask you to do is answer the question on the Edpuzzle. All right, we're going to keep going. The next couple words, we've answered, or we've said what all 3 of these words are, so we're going to go for the other ones. In the executive branch, we have a group of people called the Electoral College, and they're the actual people that get to vote for president. As it says right here, your parents don't actually vote for them. They vote for groups of people called electors that will vote for the president. The Supreme Court is the highest in a group of courts called the judicial branch. And if you remember, the word supreme means best or highest. So the Supreme Court is the highest of them. And we'll talk a little bit more about the judicial branch in like 5 minutes. Judicial review is what the judicial system does to check the power of these other 2 branches. And we'll talk a little bit about judicial review in a little bit. But basically, they could decide that a law made by the legislative branch is unconstitutional, or that an act that the president does is unconstitutional. If that happens, the law or the act by the president should be stopped. Last but not, we have 2 more terms, amendment and ratify. Amend means to make things better. So an amendment to the Constitution is a change to the Constitution. And the word ratify, which is our last word there on the blank, is to formally accept. So in order to join our country, you have to ratify the Constitution. So like I said, if Puerto Rico wants to join the country, they would have to ratify or formally accept the Constitution. If not, they're just a part of this country, but they're not a formal state. So now what I'd like to do is answer the next question. All right. Now what I did is I took a section of the reading that we looked at earlier last week to let us know how the legislative branch is organized. The legislative branch is bicameral, and bi is a Greek root meaning two. Cameral is Greek for chambers. So there are two chambers or parts, houses of Congress. The first chamber is the one that has the most power, and that chamber is called the Senate. The Senate is based on every state gets 2 senators, no matter how big or small the Senate is. That way, each state is the same in the Senate. And the senators get a 6-year term. The reason why they get 6 years is because their job generally is viewed as more important. So you want to keep the people with more important jobs in power for a little bit longer. And senators actually have a longer term of office than presidents. Presidents have 4 years, senators have 6. The second branch, or the second chamber, is called the House of Representatives. And representation in that house is based on population. So the House of Representatives is different for each state. A state like Connecticut or Rhode Island, which is relatively small, has a few amount of representatives, but a state like California or Texas has a large amount of representatives. So the House of Representatives, the lower house, is based more on population, not on equality. And each representative serves a 2-year term. So every even number year, the House of Representatives is re-elected. Now we'll go over what the judicial branch is and how that is split up. In this section right here, it actually describes 3 levels of courts. The first is a district court. It's actually up here. I don't know why the green arrow is pointing here. But the first is a district court. Another name for a district court can be a state court, but some states have more than one district. The state of Connecticut has 2 districts, the New Haven district and the Hartford district. What you would need to do is, if you pass your court case, you stay there and you are good with it. But if you don't like your court case, if a party disagrees with the decision, you can appeal to a higher court. So you go from the district court to a court called the appellate court. Kind of easy to remember that, since the word appeal means to go up to a higher group. So appeal and appellate. So like in a sport, sometimes you might disagree with a ruling, and then you could go and appeal to the referee and say, hey, I want you to relook at something. And sometimes they look at it, and that's what an appeal is. So the appellate court is the second level. And lastly, you have the Supreme Court. And if you remember, Supreme is the highest level of court. Now what I'd like to do is answer another question. Last, I want to go over the checks of each branch on each other. First, we have the executive branch, that if the legislative branch makes bad laws, they can veto those laws or cancel them. That way, the president can hold power over a Congress that doesn't make good decisions. But what about the backwards? How can the Congress check the power of the president? Well, the Congress can override a president's veto if the president just doesn't want to make a good bill. They need a 2/3 vote to override. Next, we have, how does the judicial branch get to control the legislative branch? Well, the judicial branch can declare laws as constitutional or unconstitutional. If the judicial branch, led by the Supreme Court, thinks a law is bad, they can kill it. They can get rid of it. If they call it unconstitutional, since the Constitution is the strongest thing in our country, they can get rid of it. But what about the legislative branch? How can they control the judicial branch? Well, they can actually impeach any of the Supreme Court justices if they feel that the justices aren't serving the best interest. Impeach means to bring up on charges. So they would take a bad judge and they would put him on a charge. And just like anybody else, he has to be proven guilty to be removed from office. The legislative branch can also check the power of the president. They can impeach the president too. Impeach does not mean to get rid of them, but to bring up on charges. So far, there have been no presidents who have been removed from office. Next, we have, how does the executive branch control the judicial branch? Well, the president gets to choose the new Supreme Court justices. So there's 9 justices, and if one of them needs to get eliminated, the president can choose the next one. But the legislative branch has to confirm that person, and if they don't, it goes back, and the executive branch has to choose a new one. So that way we can see that each branch has a different level of power. But how can the judicial branch check the power of the executive branch? There's actually 2 ways. First, they can rule over an impeachment trial. So let's say that we think that the president's a bad guy or a bad woman. The judicial branch gets to sit over the trial of impeachment, and it has to be proven that they did a bad job. Another thing is they can declare acts that the president does unconstitutional. So that way, if you have a bad guy as president, the Supreme Court can make sure that those things are done. Now answer your last question.